Mic check 1 2, it's the Y2K collector, and I'll need you to pardon the AC. It's starting to warm up, folks, and I'm not mad at it. But I did want to address something that was brought up in an article by The Guardian not that long ago, and it basically was talking about how Generation Z is not as interested in modern games as they are in retro games, and it seems like they're turning more towards retro themed items, and video games is definitely a big part of that. Now, whether we want to believe it or not, some of the best times, some of the most innovative times, some of the most creative times were the times back in the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s. A lot of what we see, a lot of what we play, a lot of what we do are just regurgitated versions of ideas and, things that were created back then. And I'm thankful enough that I was able to live through the tail end of the 80s, live through the 90s, as well as the early 2000s, when a lot of these very popular gaming franchises and systems were originally released, because there was a lot of genuine hype around these things. There was a lot of genuine excitement. There was a lot of genuine anticipation, because with each succeeding generation, there was something new. When the Nintendo came out, it was revolutionary because we had never seen graphics even close to that. Then when the Super Nintendo came out, it was mind-blowing because, wow, we never thought we'd be able to see that many pixels in a game. And then the Nintendo 64 came out, and our minds were blown even more because we got a version of Mario that was in 3D, that could do backflips, and that could talk. And so, when we think about these things, those were incredible times. Now, when I think about today, the market is, and when I say the market, I mean the media market is absolutely saturated, because not only do video games have to compete with DVDs, Blu-rays, the movie theater, but they have to compete with the internet. And back in the early 90s, you didn't have to compete with the internet. There wasn't a thing called the internet that was distracting young people from the excitement of a new video game or a new console. And this is the reason why I think these games are not going to be worth anything in 30 years. Here's why. Back in 1985 or 97, there weren't YouTube videos or blogs or internet spaces where millions of people could share in the same knowledge and learn about collectibles and learn about how valuable having a sealed game could be. Back then, the only people who really kept their games sealed were true, genuine, diehard collectors or gamers, or people who just forgot that they had a game still sealed in their closet somewhere. And that's what makes having a sealed game, a sealed retro game today, so valuable. Because it wasn't as intentionally sealed as you will see games being sealed in the future. So what am I saying? I'm saying that with all of the millions of YouTubers creating videos all the time, talking about how they're going to keep their video games sealed, it's only makes sense that in the future there's going to be more sealed games, because there's more gamers and more collectors keeping things sealed than there were people keeping things sealed back in the day. And that's just simply off of the strength of the information not being able to travel fast enough, right? Like, people weren't there weren't as many speculators consciously saying, hey, I'm going to go ahead and keep this stuff sealed, and I'm going to go ahead and preserve these things so that I can sell it later. That's part one. Part two, you got the entire piece of software back then. Now, granted, it was a much smaller data size, right? Like, comparing a game like Elden Ring to Super Mario World, it's like night and day. Super Mario World, the size in terms of data is minuscule in terms of the amount of data and production and programming that it takes to make a game like Elden Ring. But we don't buy games to marvel at how technologically advanced they are. We buy games for entertainment. We buy games because they entertain us, which is why to this day, a game as simple as Pac-Man or Donkey Kong can provide the smallest child just as much entertainment as a multi-million-dollar production game like Elden Ring or Ghost of Tsushima. And I think this generation of gaming has lost the entertainment factor when it comes to what makes gaming fun. Games are meant to be entertaining, not educational, not political, not woke, as some would say it. Games are purely meant to entertain you, and that's why sometimes the most simple game is the most entertaining game. The game that requires you to use as little of your brain as possible is the most entertaining game. And honestly, I think that's the reason why reality TV shows are so popular. Because when you sit down and you watch a reality TV show, and I don't care what type of reality TV show it is, because to me, they're all the same. They're all trash, right? When you sit down and you watch a reality TV show, you are truly not using your brain. I think that is when your brain is the most asleep, even more than when you go to sleep. You want to put your brain to sleep? Go watch a reality TV show. Why? Because it requires no thought, no effort. You're just watching pure stupidity. And I think sometimes, when you think about video games, games that you can play without putting too much thought into it, or games that have very simple mechanic, jump, duck, forward, backward, up, down, like sometimes the more simple it is, the less complicated it is, the more you gravitate towards it, because it allows you to take your brain off of the things that are actually giving you a headache, like life worries, issues, problems, just the things we deal with in everyday life. And that's what video games are meant to do, entertain you. And the games that we love so much, the games from back in the day, we love them because they were entertaining. They were fun. Now, don't get me wrong, you do have some games on the Super Nintendo that were a little complicated. Or even games on the NES that were complicated. I mean, try playing Metroid today. You might lose your mind. You don't have it's not as clear cut as Super Metroid or even Metroid 2. I remember playing Metroid 2 on the Game Boy. Even that game is long and extensive, and it can drive you crazy because there's a lot of backtracking, but there was still this simplicity to it. The fact that you only had 6 buttons max, well, I guess 8 if you include start and select. All the simplicity just makes it more fun. And so I'm not shocked that this next generation is more driven towards retro games. And it doesn't mean that these newer games don't have a place in gaming, because I love Ghost of Tsushima. I love how realistic it is. This is a great game to play when you can't actually go outside because of how much it makes you feel like you're outside with all the changing in the weather and the daylight and things like that. But from a gaming perspective, we've seen this huge resurgence in all things 90s. I mean, during the pandemic, we got The Last Dance. I mean, you got to watch Jordan, right? That's like peak 90s sports is Michael Jordan. You got to watch Stranger Things, which brought you right back to the late 80s, right? The arcade stores. I mean, there's been so many things in media that have brought our attention back to the late 80s and 90s. And it's just like every generation, right? Like 20 years ago, it seemed like everyone was obsessed with the 70s. 70s clothing, 70s hair, 70s music. And now we're about 30 years removed from the 90s. So it only makes sense that this generation, I even see on Instagram, like, fashion bloggers who are trying to bring 90s fashion styles back. And they're listening to Jodeci and Boyz II Men and Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. It's just crazy. But I'm interested to know what you think. Let me know down in the comments. Do you think that this generation is more driven towards 90s and 80s gaming? Or do you think the PS5 era is here to stay and it's going to reign supreme? I'm interested to know your thoughts. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.